And so, really safety is the key. Safety is the public purpose. Safety is the collective purpose. Safety is a human need. It's a neurobiological need. It allows our bodies to function. It allows parents to parent safely.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the first edition of the California Center of Excellence for Trauma-Informed Care's new podcast. And I'm happy to introduce Sarah Kaufman.
Hi, Gabby. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm really excited to sit here and talk to you.
Fantastic. If anybody is interested in communicating with us related to this podcast, you can contact us at traumainformedcalifornia@gmail.com. And we'll also be providing the show notes and other information related to this topic on our website. And that is www.trauma-informed-california.org. My name is Gabriella Grant. I'm the director of the California Center of Excellence for Trauma-Informed Care. I also coordinate the Santa Cruz Trauma Consortium and oversee a public information and advocacy project called Stop Trusted Advisor Abuse. Sarah?
Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Kaufman. I've been working with Gabby for the last 2 years or so. And back in 2018, when the Larry Nassar case was really big in national news, Gabby and I took on a project of really researching the case, learning what went wrong with USA Gymnastics, what failures were involved that stopped these young women from being protected. Who was Larry Nassar? How did he get away with this for so many years? And what was going to happen afterwards? So Gabby and I have been working on this for a while, and I'm really excited to talk to you all about it today.
So we're going to be talking about a concept called trusted advisor abuse. And we're going to apply this concept to the Larry Nassar case, and in particular, the institutional failures. So trusted advisor abuse is a phrase that I coined to talk about something that is very common. It's a form of perpetration that requires trust. And what ends up happening is a perpetrator recognizes that trust is a vehicle to be able to gain access to victims, but also gain control of victims. So what ends up happening is that the perpetrator looks for, first of all, wants to demonstrate trust, right? Trust is going to be the methodology, so trust becomes the orientation. Then you can see from there, the perpetrator starts to look and see who's trustworthy in our society. Hey, vulnerable kid who's struggling, trust your teacher and your doctor and your coach even more. Go to them, right? That's what they're told all the time. So the most important thing to recognize about trusted advisor abuse is that trust is the vehicle. It's pretty dastardly because trusted advisor abusers take trust and then they manipulate and contort it. So much so that many people, after being abused in this form of perpetration, find it very difficult to ever trust again. But that's not it. The abuser looks for positions of trust like doctors, coaches, therapists, financial advisors, yoga gurus, self-help gurus, the list is long. But then they additionally look for institutions that hire, pay for, employ, or bring in volunteers of these sorts of folks. So it's a two-pronged form of perpetration. There's the individual perpetrator, but the individual perpetrator infiltrates organizations or systems and actually takes them over from the inside, so that then the reputation of the perpetrator and the reputation of the institution get intertwined. And now the institution is faced with this. If you expose the perpetrator, you're basically going to be exposing yourself. So now the institution seeks to protect itself, but ends up having to protect the perpetrator as well. Sometimes the institutions think the perpetrator is totally innocent and they're protecting an innocent individual. I'm going to call that obliviousness. But sometimes the institution knows perfectly well what's going on and chooses not to do anything about that. And we can call that complacency. So this podcast is really designed as a public informational advocacy-oriented podcast to start to get people to use the words trusted advisor abuse. I think that that's going to help us recognize this form of perpetration. So why this first topic? Well, the first reason for the Larry Nassar case is that there's been a massive amount of information released to the public. So we know a lot about this case. There are a lot of victims, and the more publicity it's gotten, the more victims have come forward. So, even though like the Larry Nassars, these perpetrators, sometimes get away with it for a very long time, they also sometimes get caught. So we have a criminal justice system that attempts to deal with the perpetrator. We're going to see that without this understanding of trusted advisor abuse, even the criminal justice system struggles, right? Struggles to get reports, struggles to get, the system to respond. Ultimately, learning about trusted advisor abuse is going to help victims. It's going to improve investigation. It's going to make our institutions safer all the way around for everybody for all kinds of reasons. And it's going to make us a safer community, collective, to be able to do things like gymnastics or save for retirement or do the stuff that we really want to do. So keep in mind that this perpetration affects us all indirectly down the line.
Thanks for all that, Gabby. So we're going to start talking about the indictment of Larry Nassar. His indictment happened in November of 2016 on several state charges of sexual assault of a child. And these allegations, or the state charges, range between 1998 to 2005. These crimes allegedly began when the first victim was 6 years old. Larry Nassar is charged with 22 counts of first-degree criminal sexual conduct with minors. The allegations asserted that Nassar had molested young girls under the guise that he was providing legitimate medical treatment. And this happened both at his own home and at a clinic on the Michigan State University campus.
Yeah, this is another thing I want to kind of interrupt you on there, Sarah, which is Nassar volunteered for many years before getting his degree in Doctor of Osteopathic Medicine. He was volunteering. That was a good way to get access. But then he realized, if I get this degree, I'm going to be able to get even more access.
Right. And talking about that point of a lack of credibility, Nassar often used hand-on approaches instead of using actual medication. And his hand-on approaches were a lesser known type of medicine, and he uses a lot of lingo and techniques that often have been criticized for their lack of actual evidence basis.
Yes. Without getting into the controversy of the difference between MDs and DOs, one of the distinctions is that MDs are medicine doctors, right? Doctors of medicine, whereas DOs are doctors, if you will, of the body. So, there's some techniques that they use where they're putting their hands on the body, hands-on kind of techniques. So as a perpetrator, as a sexual abuser and pedophile, Larry Nassar, looking at MD versus DO, he selected DO with that hands-on practice. So keep in mind, organizations that provide licenses for doctors of osteopathic medicine, where there are hands-on approaches, are more vulnerable to trusted advisor abuse because more abusers, more perpetrators would want to get their hands on victims.
So one of the first women to publicly accuse Nassar was Rachel DeHollander, and she accused Nassar of sexually abusing her on 5 separate doctor's visits in 2000 when she was only 15 years old. And after this first public accusation, more began to steamroll. Olympic gold medalist Michaela Maroney used the #MeToo hashtag on Twitter to talk about how Nassar repeatedly molested her since 2008 when she was only 13 years old. And this continued until she retired from the sport in 2016.
Yeah. And let's keep in mind that this wasn't the first time that Michaela reported, but she had Twitter and Me Too to be able to get to more people to listen. So, the fact of the Me Too hashtag on Twitter, people were listening to that hashtag.
Right. So the hashtag was a way of getting the general public to listen to her when USA Olympics gave her no support, and they weren't protecting her in the ways that they promised to. And some other people that came forward were Maggie Nichols, who talked about how Nassar groomed her by connecting with her on Facebook and complimenting her on her appearance numerous times, even though she was a minor. Many, many, many other people came forward. I believe over the course of the court case,
over 100 women stepped forward and mind all the stigma that comes with stepping forward, there's doubtlessly many, many more that never stepped forward. That goes to show the breadth of Larry Nassar's actions and how many years that he was able to get away with these things. So in 2017, as mentioned before, Larry Nassar's medical licenses were revoked, and the Michigan Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs said that they received 3 complaints against Nassar on September 12th, September 15th, and December 22nd of 2017. And these complaints all happened after he was already a figure in the USA gymnastics scandal.
So this is a very important point right here, which is the Michigan's Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs says it received 3 complaints after the scandal. So what they're trying to say is, we didn't know about it. Nobody told about it. We're a passive receiver of reports, and nobody reported until September 12th, September 15th, and December 22nd. That is partially true, but the other part that has to be highlighted here in terms of trusted advisor abuse is, did any of these victims know about the Michigan Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs? I'm going to suggest that the answer is no. They had no idea. They complained to their coaches, to their parents, and those adults also did not report. So those adults could have reported to the Michigan's Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs, at least they're adults, but did they even know how? This is one of the things that I uncovered, is that the system of actually making a complaint against a licensed or employed individual is so baroque that it requires of the complainant a pretty significant amount of patience, focus, time, frustration tolerance to even get through it. So while Michigan's Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs might think that that somehow gets them off the hook, it actually reveals that they are complacent as an institution. Thanks, Sarah.
So in 2018, Michigan State University reached a $500 million settlement with Larry Nassar victims. Today, in 2020, there's still a settlement against Larry Nassar being negotiated, and there's been an outpouring of articles and podcasts about this case. Many of these podcasts and documentaries talk a lot about the case, but don't always talk about the institutional failures that the university and USA Olympics took place in for decades.
Yeah. So, Larry Nassar was the hand that abused those girls, but the U.S. Olympic Committee, USA Gymnastics, the University of Michigan, and the Caroli's Gymnastics Ranch were the arm that the hand needed.
On January 24th of 2018, Nassar was sentenced to 175 years in Michigan State Prison after he pled guilty to 7 accounts of sexual assault of minors. And on February 5th of 2018, he was sentenced to an additional 40 to 125 years in prison after pleading guilty to an additional 3 counts of sexual assault. And he's currently being held in a high security men's prison in Florida.
Yeah. Larry Nassar is never going to get out of prison again. So that, I'm sure, is a deep relief for everybody who's ever met him in their lives. But keep in mind that $500 million that the University of Michigan, i.e. every single Michigan taxpayer, had to pay for Larry Nassar's abuse. Trusted advisor abuse is pervasive. It facilitates serial predation, and it's super expensive. And who ends up paying for it is very often the taxpayer, in addition to the devastation of the individual lives. So, it's deeply disturbing. And, what's so interesting is how little trusted advisor abuse has been addressed. The opposite, or rather the traditional way of dealing with trusted advisor abuse has been the bad apple approach. The bad apple approach says, coaches and teachers and yoga instructors, they're all great people, but maybe there's just one bad apple. So we're going to wait until the one bad apple lifts itself to the top, and then we're just going to simply toss it, into the pile. It doesn't work like that. If we use the bad apple approach, there's going to be a whole bunch of perpetration going on before that apple pops up. And then if, who's ever bobbing for apples is, oblivious and complacent, they're not even going to notice that bobbing bad apple. So it's just a bad approach.
And what we'll hear from a lot of the victim statements is that many of these people, as we said, did report in the past. And there's a lot of people complicit in everything that Larry Nassar has done to these survivors. A lot of people have received some fallout for their complacency, though we might want to say not enough. So, for example, in March of 2017, Stephen Penny, who was largely complicit or ignored a lot of what Larry Nassar was doing, he turned a blind eye, was forced to resign. But at the same time, though he was forced to resign, he received a severance package of approximately $1 million.
I just have to say, that is absolutely absurd. Not only should this person be deprived of $1 million, this individual should be required never to have anything to do with children or anything like that ever again. Just unbelievable that this guy got $1 million out of this whole thing.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you, Gabby. And there were some MSU gymnastics coach who were found guilty of multiple counts of lying to the police, such as Kathy Clegg. She was just found guilty in 2020. But there are definitely still a lot of people that were complicit that never really got held accountable for their part in what happened against these young women.
Yeah. For example, the CEO of the United States Olympic Committee, Scott Blackman, was the head of the entire pyramid there. And he resigned after a cancer diagnosis, not fired. He's been criticized and he's disgraced. He's got a black mark. Blackman, has a mark on him, but it's not enough. The former U.S. Olympic chief of sports performance, Alan Ashley, was terminated because he, quote, enabled a wolf in sheep's clothing to molest and abuse dozens more girls under the guise of providing them medical treatment. And this kind of indictment is page after page in the 233-page report by the law firm Ropes and Gray. It's called the Ropes and Gray report, but it is a huge indictment of the individuals and their failings within those institutions. What about Rhonda Fain? What happened to her, Sarah?
So Rhonda Fain, she was a gymnastics coach for USA Gymnastics. So Rhonda Fain was told by some of the gymnasts on the team that Larry Nassar was sexually assaulting them. But she waited over a month to report it to the authorities. Due to this, University of Michigan fired her, but they didn't fire her until this case became something that the media picked up on.
Yeah. She was not fired 1 month after the report by the girls. She only reported 1 month after the girls told her. And then she wasn't fired for many years later. So, what I see when I look at this is, I'm just going to give a little, gender analysis here, which is that trusted advisor abuse not only creates victimization and allows for perpetration and creates corrupted institutions and systems, but it also divvies up on a gendered level too, which is that trusted advisor abuse really protects the powerful, and therefore the least powerful ones, although they're sometimes the ones who are like, I have the most to lose, It's not really true, Kathy and Rhonda. You didn't have the most to lose. But in relationship to what you had, it felt like you had the most to lose. However, at the end of the day, what did your institutions do? They protected their more powerful, who happened to be male, and they actually punished the less powerful. And then the last update that we have amongst this cast of criminals is in January 2020, the former U.S. Olympic women's gymnastics coach, who was also the owner and head of Twistars Gymnastics Club, where Larry Nassar worked a whole bunch. His facility was raided by federal agents with warrants. I don't believe he's been arrested, but he's definitely in their targets. So, people did come down, Sarah, but it really doesn't look like the people who were most in charge and, in fact, who made the most money suffered the most. The man who did the most perpetration, Larry Nassar, he's in jail now, but he definitely didn't suffer up until that moment. And all of these other men who were in positions of power in women's gymnastics seem to have gotten very little punishment other than, their own health declining or their own reputational bruising.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And something I think also important to note is that once Larry Nassar was sentenced, a lot of the media about the case kind of reduced. There was less talk about it. And I feel like in some ways that made the law enforcement, Michigan State University, Olympics feel like in some ways the work had been done when there were still a lot of people that were complicit that needed to be held accountable that still were not.
Yeah, those are excellent points, Sarah. Larry Nassar is a problem, but he is not the problem. The problem is trusted advisor abuse. And until and unless US Gymnastics, US Olympic Committee, University of Michigan, women's gymnastics, and a whole bunch of other fields start to actually reckon with this form of perpetration, they're going to use that bad apple approach and just throw Larry Nassar into prison and think that their work is done. Not only is their work not done in terms of holding accountable those who did, but also changing the policies, the procedures, the internal culture. Who do you report to? That it needs to be a lot more transparent. And for parents themselves to understand trusted advisor abuse better so that they don't feel if I want my child to go to the Olympics, or if my child wants to go to the Olympics, then I have to trust A, B, C, and D. As a matter of fact, if your child wants to go to the Olympics, your child is now vulnerable and requires more protection. It's kind of like the reverse of what we've always thought. Wow, Sarah, just reviewing that case is, first of all, it's nauseating, like whenever I review these trusted advisor abuse cases, but it's also phenomenal, don't you think, that he was able to get away with it so blatantly in front of everybody for so long?
Yeah, I remember listening to some of the victim statements from the court case, and a lot of the survivors will be like, I didn't even realize what was happening to me because he did it while my own mom was in the room, like during my medical exam. And because he put one hand on one thigh to like hide what he was doing with his other hand, he was able to get away with a lot in plain sight because he was trusted as a doctor.
In plain sight, although hidden in plain sight, which is an interesting combo there, but also in front of parents. Parents were often in the room. He used medicine, or doctoring, if you will, as his cover. And also, another thing that Nassar did was he got involved on a voluntary basis in the policies around Olympic gymnastics. And he wrote the medical policy for the female Olympic gymnastics. Interestingly, the males in gymnastics did not need this policy, just the girls. And that was before Olympic qualifying events. They had to actually see him for a medical review before they went and competed. So you had situations where parents were driving their daughters at 11 and 12 o'clock at night to Larry Nassar's house or his hotel room to have him inspect these children and give his imprimatur of approval before they actually competed in Olympic qualifying events. It's terrifying to think about. It's absolutely terrifying to think about. But that is how crafty these trusted advisor abusers are. They realize, hey, I need a policy that feeds me my victims. So, Sarah, when we look at trusted advisor abuse from an institutional level, the way we are today, rather than looking at, for example, the victim, which we could be doing, or the perpetrator, what we're really looking at today is the institution. And first of all, would you say that in the Larry Nassar case, there was a pattern of ignored reports?
I would definitely say so because USA Gymnastics was receiving complaints about Nassar in the 1990s. And there's really no reason for decades to pass before any action was taken. And there's no reason to not report to the police for a month after finding out that one of your gymnasts was assaulted.
And then what about the fact that for trusted advisor abuse to keep on going, victims are blamed by the institution? So did you see that in this case as well?
Something that I remember reading was that with USA Gymnastics, it wasn't only sexual abuse, it was emotional abuse, it was physical abuse, and those other types of abuse made the gymnasts feel like they had to be obedient to sexual abuse as well. Which was something I found obviously terrifying and horrifying to read, but really interesting because USA Gymnastics was complicit in a lot of different types of abuse. And through this abuse, they blamed the survivors rather than looking at their colleagues and focusing in on what they're doing wrong.
In the podcast Believed, one of the victims told her father what Larry Nassar had done. And Larry Nassar had groomed the parents so well that the father did not believe his own daughter and told her that she had to apologize to Larry Nassar. And they had conflict for years and years and years and years and years. And every single fight they had would result in the father saying, "Are you now going to apologize to Larry?" And then the girl, I think, if I remember correctly, she finally did apologize to Larry Nassar because she just wanted to be able to get along with her dad. And unfortunately, what ended up happening, Sarah, was when the whole, ugly fiasco was finally revealed for what it was, this father felt so guilty that he hadn't believed his daughter and he had supported Larry that he actually died by suicide. Victims are blamed. They blame themselves. I chose gymnastics, then I deserve to be in pain. This is a doctor and I'm the one in pain and I'm going to Larry. I need Larry, so I'm to blame. Now, keep in mind, Sarah, you probably saw this. Larry would use his role as a doctor to perpetrate against victims. But what Larry also did was he used his role as a doctor to create these PowerPoints of child sexual abuse and actually train other physical therapists and other DOs and other sports medicine people on these completely non-medically indicated criminal acts. So what this doctor was doing was he was creating this alternate reality that he was an okay doctor who was on these children's side.
Something you said that struck me was talking about Larry Nassar as a very nice doctor. And I remember in a lot of the testimony, these survivors are talking about how Larry Nassar was the one nice adult around them, how all these other adults were, rude to them all the time and abusive. And he was the one nice one. He would leave candy underneath their pillows when they would camp in Texas, which is just another technique that he used to continue abusing, of course. But the words "very nice doctor" just stood out to me while you were talking.
In that podcast, Believed, they call him a really nice guy. And as a matter of fact, I thought the podcast was even called A Really Nice Guy. He was such a nice guy, right? So very often these abusers are really nice guys. Here's a classic. He would never do that. He would never do that. And that is what protects the abuser, their reputation, rather than what's really going on. So, I wanted to just review how many organizations have been reported to. So the first one was the U.S. Olympic Committee, got reports. The U.S. Gymnastics got reports. The University of Michigan got reports. Holt High School got reports. Twistars Gymnasium got reports. And the Michigan Board of Licensing got reports. Local police got reports, and FBI got reports. So there were a lot of institutions that got reports, and a lot of victims had to get together in order to make their reports even count. So it wasn't until 2017 that 18 victims filed a civil lawsuit in a federal court against Nassar, Michigan State, U.S. Gymnastics, and Twistars Gymnastics Club. The lawsuit also says that a parent raised concerns to Twistars in 1997. So we've got a lot of complaints. Even when people don't know how to complain, we got these complaints. And we can only imagine, Sarah, how many more complaints there were that we just don't have trace of, that nobody has record of or memory of. The 2017 lawsuit states that victims raised concerns to Michigan State coaches or trainers in 1999 and 2000. No investigation was conducted. Not Larry. And in 2014, so many years before, right, MSU actually cleared Nassar of any wrongdoing 3 months after an MSU graduate came forward to complain. The panel that cleared him was a panel that Nassar himself selected. Now, I don't know about you, but if you committed an atrocious crime, would you feel pretty confident that you could get away with it if you could select your panel that was going to decide whether you were guilty or not? Yeah, right? If I were a perpetrator and I got to pick the people who are going to judge to see whether I was a perpetrator or not, wouldn't I pick the people who trusted me the most to put on that panel? Definitely. So what we're seeing over and over and over again is the manipulation of trust. It's so powerful. And yet it seems that we're very unused to, unwilling, uncomfortable with analyzing this trust business. We just think it's all good. And it's not. There's a real negative side to it. So in 2004, the Meridian Township Police got reports against Larry Nassar. So, this pattern of ignored reports is very clear, and it's all over the place. One person goes to the police, the other person goes to Michigan State. So, our culture sends messages that says that little girls tell lies, that little girls are liars. Little girls are little honesty machines, It's it can be uncomfortable, especially 13, 14, and 15 when they come at you. But they're very honest. Do little girls lie? Of course they do. Are they like known pathological lying machines? Of course they're not. They're actually very ethical, very highly honest little individuals. So what we're really talking about here is Larry Nassar, who had a pedophilic predilection for young girls, had to discredit young girls. And how did he do it? He relied on old social gender tropes that little girls are tellers of tales, that they talk a lot and narc on people, but they're actually spreading lies. So untrue. So the next thing that we're going to look at in terms of trusted advisor abuse is something called institutional complacency and obliviousness. I'm going back to the Ropes and Gray report, and in it, they write, USA Gymnastics viewed itself as a resource provider and imposed limitations on its role in actively managing its membership. USAIG misconstrued principles of due process in a manner that led USAG, US Gymnastics, to refuse to take action in response to credible allegations of sexual misconduct. And as demonstrated by US Gymnastics' response to the Indianapolis Stars investigation, US Gymnastics fiercely guarded its reputation as a leader in child protective measures, thereby widening the disconnect. So basically, institutional complacency and obliviousness is clearly laid at the feet of US Gymnastics because they took a step back and looked elsewhere. And where were they looking? They were looking at their reputation. In addition to being a leader in child protection measures and failing phenomenally, Sarah, you might remember, because you were probably that age, didn't you see those Olympic gymnasts all over the place in commercials and TV shows, and didn't you see them everywhere?
Yeah, and it was almost as if like every company wanted to be partnered with them, that every company wanted that pure image. I feel like I definitely saw USA Gymnastics on some like even fast food companies. They were just advertised everywhere.
Everywhere. That was US Gymnastics. I guarantee you those individual gymnastics did not get a dime of any of that. US Gymnastics got that money while it was falsely upholding its reputation as child protective, a leader in child protection measures. And meanwhile, they were hiding the actual crimes of a pedophile in their very ranks. As nauseating as it makes me to think about Larry Nassar, it makes me even more nauseated when I think about these institutions and how they use these children and then abandon these children to a psychopathic predator. In 2014, Klages used Nassar as a recruiting tool for young gymnasts. In a letter to a young recruit, Klages wrote, "We have Larry Nassar. Enough said about that." So not only Are they using these children? They actually use Nassar as a recruitment tool. So here was another, so on the college level, right, you have this institutional obliviousness and complacency. Come to our college because we've got Larry Nassar. But then on the healthcare level, oh, the girls call him Dr. Larry. Klages explained that Nassar was the Michigan State team doctor and treats Olympic level gymnasts. So athletically, collegiately, but also in terms of healthcare. He's a doctor. He's a doctor. He's one of the best doctors. According to who, right? Who are these measures? It seems to me it was all in relational stances that people were making evaluations about Larry. Where was anything objective? So there was also kind of a lack of big picture safety, almost a sense that these little girls have picked this very, very cruel sport, and so they deserve anything that happens to them. But in reality, there had been other warning signs in US gymnastics. Whatever the big old case is, Larry Nassar, once you throw that case off the pile, you're going to find a whole bunch more cases. They might not be quite as egregious or quite as bad as Larry, or they might be worse, and we just haven't found it yet because, honestly, we're not looking. It is required of the organization that brings this grouping together to create policies and procedures that are transparent, to alert people to what trusted advisor abuse is, what to do about it and where to complain about it, what's going to happen with that complaint, transparency, and then to let people know what has happened. And keep in mind, Sarah, the aspects of due process are good. We don't want to just willy-nilly accuse people like a witch hunt. However, once an institution has information that a person has actually engaged in criminal conduct, that needs to be publicized. Why? Well, one is that the institution will have made a clear, attempt to stop this perpetrator. This perpetrator is not going to be able to go on to the University of Mississippi next, right? Because there's been this public announcement. So the benefit is twofold. One is that this institution no longer has Larry Nassar, but now no institution is going to have Larry Nassar. So now University of Michigan is no longer in collusion with the perpetrator, but is actually outside of whatever the perpetrator is doing. So it benefits the institution because it is now disconnected from the perpetrator. It's not hiding the perpetrator, it's now exposing the perpetrator. But here's the other thing, is that when you say, hey, we fired Larry Nassar for this, this, and this, other victims will come forward. So transparent process is actually the most protective thing that an institution can do for itself. No process, arbitrary process, are things that not only harm the victim and keep the perpetrator perpetrating, but it actually ultimately compromises that very institution. US gymnastics is a catastrophe right now. Its reputation is very, very tarnished. Their institutions are now in tatters. And the athletes that would have benefited from these institutions, the students that would have benefited from these institutions, we're all collectively worse off. So bad apple thinking, I think it culturally makes sense. Let's just get rid of Larry Nassar and call it good. But it really does not solve the problem. So Sarah, as we're wrapping up to this first podcast, do you have any thoughts about trusted advisor abuse and how it applies to the Larry Nassar case?
I never really thought about how that complete transparency about processes protect the institution in the long run as well, because I feel like a lot of times, like with USA Gymnastics, they didn't want to do that because they were afraid of these things getting out and tarnishing their reputation. But obviously look at where we are now, and it's so much worse than it would have been if they just came forward in the 1990s, or even with the first official complaint a few years back, rather than all of these things coming out at once. So it not only protects the girls, but it protects the institutions. And obviously they're going to care a lot about that.
Yeah, unfortunately they care usually a lot more about that. So as we wrap up today, for all of you out there listening, we're really interested in your comments. We're really interested in what you have to say about our new podcast. It's a labor of love. Go to our website, trauma-informed-california.org. And you'll find a link to Trusted Advisor Abuse. It's a great one. There's a lot of information. Become more educated about your rights. As a student, you have rights in your institution. As a patient, you have rights within healthcare. As an athlete, you have rights. There's a new organization called Safe Sports. So, there are protections. However, if you are unaware of your protections, then chances are you're not going to avail yourself of them. So know your rights, and then learn the complaint process. Whatever institution you are in, how do you complain? Now, of course, we have all kinds of cultural messages about people who complain, and especially women who complain. However, it is incumbent upon us to start to learn these complaint processes. Speak up, speak out. You can see in the Larry Nassar case that the cumulative voices of these young women were a roar. Your individual voice matters. And even if you're not being heard today, somebody is going to hear you eventually. And that voice is going to become part of a roar.